I was 13 the first time my mother drove me past the rusted cattle gate and said we were going camping. She made me change into torn jeans and a threadbare t-shirt in the back seat, then took my shoes and socks like she was collecting contraband. The pines in Pine Hollow leaned toward each other in a hush, and the air smelled like sap and metal. My mother, Celine Hale, checked the time on her phone, then pointed with a lacquered nail at a man assembling a crossbow beside the truck bed. "You're going to run through those trees until the nice man catches you," she said, voice smooth as a sales pitch. "If you touch the road before sundown, we get paid. If you don't, we don't." Clear, Rowan. I laughed because it sounded like a dare on a playground. Then the man started counting down from 10, and Celine's hand moved from my shoulder to the small of my back in a practiced push. When he said 3, I realized there were no tents, no cooler, no sleeping bags, just orange flagging tape on the tree line and a digital timer on his wrist. I ran. Branches raked my bare feet like wire brushes. Dry needles slid under my skin. Twice an arrow whispered past that tiny, wicked sound glass makes when it chips. I flung myself into a hollow log and lay there with my heartbeat slamming against the damp wood. He walked circles for hours, calling me Little Rabbit, tapping the bark with the bow limb, whistling a tune I didn't know. When the timer finally chirped, the woods went quiet. I crawled out the opposite end of the log and followed a game trail until I saw the gravel track. Celine was waiting with the window-down sunglasses on the purse already open for cash. "Good work," she said, counting bills. "Next time, give him more of a chase. They like to feel they earned it." On the way home, she stopped at McDonald's. She ordered a Happy Meal like we'd just won a soccer scrimmage and asked if I wanted extra ketchup. Grease salted the air. I stared at the yellow slide on the playground and wondered if the kids would notice the mud caked under my nails. Celine dabbed at a fleck of dirt on my cheek with a napkin, the way other mothers wipe away chocolate. The hunts became monthly. Different men, different rules. A borrowed rifle one time, a compound bow another. Once, it was just a knife in his bare hands, and the understanding that if he caught me, it would still count. Celine refined me like a product line. She bought a used field manual on evasion and made me learn to zigzag across open ground to breathe through my nose so my breath wouldn't fog in cold air to double back in streams. She had me memorize the topography of Pine Hollow, which oaks forked low enough to climb where the ground held prints where it swallowed them. She drew routes on printed satellite maps and circled blind spots with a red pen. "You're worth nothing to me dead," she said, tapping the map. "So don't mess this up." After the 4th hunt, I tried to run. I made it as far as the bus depot before Celine found me as unruffled as ever, holding photos she'd taken of me, changing clothes cropped to look compromising. "I call the police, I tell them you're a runaway who's been selling herself," she murmured. "Where do you end up, Rowan? Not with me. With someone who won't bother with rules." She had already seeded the ground a guidance counselor told I fantasized violently, a therapist with neat notes about my paranoid narratives. Truth couldn't compete with her head start. By the 8th hunt, I was good enough to scare myself. I learned which deadfalls hid traps. I found a rusted bear trap, re-oiled the hinge, and reset it where the leaf litter naturally drifted. I led a man across it like I was pulling him on a string. The jaws clapped his ankle and he went down swearing so loud birds erupted from the canopy. Another time, I doubled back and made a careless hunter shoot himself in the foot. His howl felt like thunder rolling somewhere that didn't involve me. Celine raised the price. Experienced prey, she called me, and it stuck. She bought night vision trail cams and ran extension cords from a generator in the maintenance shed. She logged paths and marked start lines and sold time windows like tee times at a golf course. Hunt 10 nearly ended me. A former military contractor caught my wrist with one hand and my throat with the other, lifting like he was weighing fish. When the dark came and my body went slack, he dropped me already looking for the camera to celebrate. I played dead until his footsteps faded, then crawled under mountain laurel and breathed dirt. Hunt 11 should have been easy, an old banker with a tremor, but he brought his own rule. He only needed to injure me. The arrow through my calf baked a scar that still tightens in the cold. I told Celine I was done. She laughed and opened her booking app. "Next month is special," she said. "Group hunt, 5 clients, various weapons, last girl standing." "Last girl what?" She slid a screenshot across the counter. A child stared from the photo with eyes too big for her small face. The handler's message called her Ivy. 11, maybe. The words premium rate blinked under the total. Either both of you make it out, Celine said, or neither of you does. They're paying for blood. I went still. Something old and cold inside me sorted itself into a single straighter line. After that, I started stealing. During supply runs, I palmed fishing line, a card of box cutter blades, a coil of thin rope. I tucked a folding map of the state forest into my waistband and studied it under my blanket. I walked the property at dawn and at noon, learning how the light changed visibility, how the creek hid scent where the cameras overlapped and where they didn't. I tested plants. One crushed to a green paste that made skin sting and itch. Another slicked onto metal left a tacky film. I disassembled a cheap burner phone I found under Celine's driver's seat, then reassembled it so its battery would hold more than a ghost of a charge. The afternoon of Hunt 13. Celine drove me early to walk the course. I nodded obediently, then slipped into the trees and went to work. I strung fishing line between two trunks at throat height where a deer path narrowed. I sharpened saplings to punji points and disguised the pit with windfall needles. I loosened the mounting bracket on one camera so a hard twist would cant it skyward. I tucked a strip of cloth under a rock near a ridge where thermals always lifted wind, perfect for a lure. Celine was too busy thumbing numbers into her phone to see me accumulate edges. By sunset, an SUV idled behind the gate. Ivy arrived with a handler who kept a hand on her shoulder the way a puppeteer keeps tension in a string. She was shaking so hard her teeth clicked, and I wanted to catch her eye to say, "I see you," but fear has its own gravity. Celine made us strip and change into matching white dresses for visibility. She lined us up along the truck tailgate like merchandise. 5 men drifted in a loose half-circle passing a bottle and evaluating with the slow proprietary gaze that made my skin shrink. Their weapons were a catalog, a bolt-action rifle, a compound bow, a hunting knife on a leather thong, a revolver worn shiny where a thumb had rested for years, a short shotgun with the stock cut down. Bets changed hands in cash and mean laughter. One man, tall deliberate, kept his eyes on the terrain instead of us. I filed him under danger. He reminded me of the contractor from 10 minus the swagger. Names bounced around as they joked Kellen Mack, Drew Rook Hansen, but I did not attach them to faces. Faces blur when you're running. Habits don't. I memorized gaits, how each man carried weight, which foot was dominant, who breathed through his mouth, who listened more than he spoke. Celine checked her timer, lifted the air horn in one hand, and smiled like a hostess announcing a first course. I reached for Ivy's hand. "Follow me if you want to live," I whispered low enough that only fear could carry it. The horn detonated the dusk, one long metallic scream that sent deer leaping and crows exploding from the crowns of the pines. The men whooped as if they were boarding a roller coaster. I pulled Ivy left away from the obvious trail and the camera grid that fed the eastern monitors. Her palm was slick in mine bones birdlight. Behind us, a safety clicked off. For the first time in 13 hunts, I was not prey. I was the one waiting in the trees. The horn's last metallic wail still hung in the pines when I squeezed Ivy's hand 3 times, our new signal for left water quiet. We cut across a bed of ferns instead of the obvious trail low enough that needles brushed our backs. Behind us came the clatter of men who'd paid to forget what they were and remember something worse. A safety clicked off. Someone whooped like he'd just won front row tickets. At the deer pinch, the path narrowed between 2 saplings. I dropped, taking Ivy with me. Kellen Heavy Boots' impatient stride hit the fishing line at throat height and made the sound a jar makes when it seals. He spun backward into the duff, grabbed at his neck, and lost the rifle in the leaves. We didn't stay to celebrate. I hauled Ivy by the wrist until the ground turned wet and the creek revealed its pale backing beneath the trees. Mud is camouflage and medicine both if you let it be. I scooped handfuls and worked it over Ivy's arms, the bright white fabric that made her a lighthouse, the thin planes of her face. "Breathe through your nose," I told her. "Don't gasp. Stay low. Put your feet where I put mine." She nodded, eyes huge, jaw trembling so hard her teeth ticked. I wrapped her palms with strips I ripped from my hem and tied the ends inside her fists so they wouldn't catch. Voices fanned out behind us. They were already trying to corral, not chase amateurs get greedy about the route. Over the water, I heard Rook, the tall, deliberate one, use numbers instead of yells. "Grid 3 Epsilon. Sweep north bank. 2 on south with me." He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. The creek carried his calm like a line-drawn map. He had the compound bow and a hunter's habit of underreacting. We crabbed along the bank until I felt what I'd loosened that morning, the cold metal stem of a trail cam. I tilted it skyward with a push of my forearm and used 2 fingers to smear a muddy thumbprint across the lens. The red status LED blinked and then did nothing you could see. Good. 1 blind window to cross to the hollow log. The cash wasn't much. 3 box cutter blades duct taped to wood handles, a roll of gauze, a coil of thin rope matches wrapped in plastic film, a handful of zip ties, a cheap flashlight with a dying heart. I slid 1 knife into Ivy's hand and showed her the grip blade down wrist tight. Don't slash punch. Only if someone grabs you, I whispered. She swallowed and tucked it against her palm as if it might vanish. A howl fractured the night from somewhere south pain not play. The punji pit had found a leg. Max swore in a voice that already expected to be obeyed. He wasn't the one in the hole, he was the one assigning blame. Good. Let them argue. Arguments make noise. We moved upstream where the creek curled toward a stand of sweet gum and then forked. The left branch was faster with shallow riffles and 2 low crossings. The right ran longer under tight cover roots knit like fingers over the water. Ivy's hand was shaking in mine. Right, I said, because cover beats speed when you're nothing but 2 white flags in the dark. Halfway to the fork, an arrow struck a trunk and shivered. Ivy flinched. So did I a half-second later, because trained bodies learn the delay keeps you alive. Rook had the angle. He'd guessed we'd stay in the water because amateurs run the bank until they slog. I worked the arrow free, careful of the broadhead. Carbon fiber shaft, firm spine, razor tip. Good tool. It went into my hand like it belonged there. The generator's hum began as a rumor and then settled into a direction. Sound is a compass if you let it be. I counted my steps and the stones and put Ivy on the same rhythm. Left, right, pause, left, right, pause, so her feet would hit the rocks that didn't rock. When the water deepened to the hip, we climbed out into a thicket of laurel and boxwood that grabbed at cloth like begging hands. The electrical box sat where it always had, strapped to a post with a belt of rusted metal. I wedged the box cutter into the cable sheath and sawed. The outer jacket fought, then yielded. Copper flashed like a fish belly. Sparks spat. 5 camera LEDs winked out downslope in a sleepy sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I smelled the bite of insulation and kept cutting until the copper separated clean. The woods changed. Vision is a habit. Break it in one place and the other senses take over. The men grew louder without the eyes that told them where to be quiet. South line, someone barked. Check the shed. Another answered too fast. Drew, the one with the revolver, had a sandpapery voice and a cough he tried to ignore. We crossed a low swale toward an old oak with lightning scars. A trail cam, thigh-high to catch crawlers, stared blankly. I slid the SD card out and fed it to the pocket I'd stitched inside my dress. 2 more cards after that, plucked like berries. Evidence if we live to name it that. Do you have anyone? Ivy asked. First full sentence. Her voice had the threadbare sound panic makes when it's tired of running. A neighbor, a friend, anyone who... No, I said. Honesty is quicker to carry. Do you? My sister, she said. And then stopped, as if the sound of those words might draw a line to the wrong ears. He says, if I don't make him money... She didn't finish. She didn't need to. I squeezed her hand 3 times, not for left water quiet, but for I heard you. Then we climbed the lightning oak to see how badly we were cornered. 20 feet up, I counted beams. 3 lights clustered at the main trail. One Hanson shotgun was pacing a broad arc, trying to read sign he didn't know how to read. Rook moved slower than the others, pausing every few breaths to listen topography in his head. Up that high, the air held the metallic smell of coming rain. First pinpricks tapped the leaves, then a steady thin thread of drop after drop. Rain steals heat, but it also steals scent and smooth sound. We need to move, I said. We'll shake them better if the water rises. On the way down under the sheltering weight of the oak, I slipped the burner phone from where I'd taped it flush against my spine. The battery icon blinked one last stubborn sliver. I thumbed a text to 911 with coordinates I'd memorized from the forestry map, then slid the phone into the crook of a root and pressed send. Maybe it would go. Maybe it would die trying. Either way, the message didn't weigh anything now. By the time we reached the culvert under the old logging road, the rain had turned the creek the color of tea. The pipe's mouth gaped low water halfway up the circle, black as a pupil. I put my ear to the concrete, nothing but flow. On your belly, I said. Elbows and knees. If you panic, count with me. Cold ate us in a bite. Concrete scraped skin raw where the dress didn't cover. Ivy's breath skittered into little animal sounds. Count, I said, voice flat, as if it was a class where grades mattered. 1, 2, 3, 4. She matched me, hiccuping on 7 and 9, but she matched. In that blind tube, the only world was the world in our mouths, numbers, and the straight line of forward. We came out into a mat of wet vines and lay there shaking, listening to how the rain changed the men. Their flashlights became little islands of guesswork. Voices bumped into one another and apologized for it. I wrapped my ankle with more cloth when it rolled wrong on a hidden root and hissed lightning up my calf. Pain is a kind of clock. It ticks whether you look at it or not. A walkie-talkie crackled near the southern boundary, close enough for us to hear Celine's business voice come through. North, exit blocked. Bonuses if completion before midnight. Keep chatter down. I pictured her under the SUV's hatch black umbrella, neat hair shoes that don't belong to Woods. I wanted to throw something heavy. Instead, I found the nettle-leaved plant I'd tested that morning, the one whose crushed sap itches like thought you can't let go. I ground a handful between rocks and smeared a ribbon of green along a narrow section of trail where men would brush with wrists. Little tortures burn time. Time is a currency you can spend against hunters, the way they spend it against you. We were 50 yards from the fence when the rain brightened with reflected light. Headlamps, the SUV drifting like a lighthouse spotlight touching trunks in a white sweep. I pulled Ivy flat and felt with my fingers for the tin I'd stashed earlier under a rock. Dry pine needles from noon, a handful that smoked the right way. The match took reluctant, then compliant. Wet branches on top made smoke without flame. The white sheet in my pocket became a flag to hang on a low branch where Rook would like the angle. He took the bait, an arrow thunked into tree and quivered, beautiful and useless. 3 left if he'd come with 6. We reverse crawled downslope through leaves so saturated they moved like cloth. My ankle gave a rebellious twist, the kind that sings all the way to the back teeth. I bit the inside of my cheek and tasted iron. Ivy tried to pull me upright and nearly went with me when I pitched. We slithered the rest of the way into a shallow ravine that smelled like drowned cedar. Above us, Rook's voice clean as a blade. Hold your lines. They're trying to funnel us. Hanson stopped ranging. Stand still and listen. I didn't love that he could read the terrain the way I did. I also knew he wasn't the one drunk on power. Drunk men do brave, stupid things. Professionals do patient, ruthless things. I had patience too. The ravine collected fallen limbs in a ribcage. I threaded the rope around the arrow shaft a foot from the tip and tied a binding knot, then tested the give. The spear wasn't elegant, but reach beats bare hands. Ivy watched with the kind of concentration survival grants for free. Rain rolled off her nose. Her lips had gone blue at the edges. I put her hands under my armpits to warm them. 2 hours, I said, maybe less. We live that long we see a sky change its mind. A siren lifted out of the distance like something being remembered. Not closer, not yet, but real. Ivy made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. I wanted to lean into it. I didn't. Sirens can lie or they can simply be late. Movement to our left, the quick, aggressive kind that doesn't know how to stop. Mac burst through a screen of alder with his knife out and his lungs doing all the talking. I didn't give him a speech. A handful of wet soil in the eyes works in any century. He reeled, swinging blind. I used his balance the way you use a door hinge, sidestepped and pushed. He went down into the tangle of punji sticks I'd planted at noon when the slope was dry. Screaming started small and then tried to be bigger than the weather. He wasn't going to die of it. He was going to be busy. Don't look, I told Ivy, because looking steals minutes you won't get back. We went to elbows and knees again and made for the darker dark where the ravine bent north. The SUV's light turned the smoke into wallpaper across the fence line. Somewhere behind that artificial moon, Celine blew the air horn in a pattern she used to drill me like a metronome. 3 short, 2 long east fence, lowest span. I went west because I had learned to use her instincts as a mirror she couldn't stand. The rain thickened until it felt like crawling through rope. My ankle ticked toward revolt. The knife in Ivy's fist never wavered. We reached the shadow of the old logging road for the second time different angle now that the creek had swollen. A culvert farther north, bigger, longer, with a concrete lip you could jam a heel on if you had a heel. We had skin and will. Behind us, Drew called to Kellen that he'd found a strip of white cloth. Rook corrected him. Wind eddied. You're downrange. Reset. It should have scared me that he read thermals. It calmed me instead. It meant his brain was busy with the right puzzle. Busy brains make space. We belly-wormed through the fern undercut and came up behind a fallen snag. The world on the other side of the trunk was a slightly different world, quieter except for rain, emptier except for wet. I checked the sky for a color change. The edge of night had softened by a fraction no one with money would have noticed. 2 hours, I said again, not because the number was right, but because naming a clock keeps your hands from shaking. Ivy squeezed my fingers, 1, 2, 3, left water quiet, even though we weren't moving yet. It wasn't a message anymore. It was a promise. We slid along the snag listening to the men spend themselves. We had maybe 2 hours until first light. And we were not done. Rain braided itself through the pines until the whole forest felt like a single wet rope. Ivy and I slid along the blown-down trunk, then angled north where the creek widened and the banks rose like 2 gray ribs. My ankle kept time with its own metronome, sharp, dull, sharp, and I filed the pain away, the way you file a map, something to consult, not obey. Behind us, the men spent their voices. Drew coughed. Kellen swore about mud like mud had a grudge. The only sound that held steady was Rook, that quiet geometry of his moving from point to point, a pencil sketch of the hunt that never needed ink. We reached the larger culvert where the old logging road crossed a feeder stream. The pipe yawned wide enough to swallow a door half full of brown water, mouth rimmed with algae slick as soap. Same drill I told Ivy. On your belly. Count if your breath gets wild. She nodded, chattering teeth clacking together like dice. We slid in elbows and knees, concrete raking skin where the dress had frayed to nothing. The water was colder than any night, and loud inside the tube, a drum you crawled through. Halfway, Ivy's breathing went ragged. Count, I said flat, as a teacher giving her a number to hold instead of fear. 1, 2, 3. She matched me, missed 7, found 8, held 9 like a rung until 10 arrived to pull her forward. We came out into a fan of wet ferns and lay there listening. Above the road, the storm-flattened sound turned flashlights into small mistakes. Voices had drifted east, which meant our west was newly vacant. A plastic clatter ghosted through the rain near the southern boundary walkie-talkie. I reached the snag where I'd seen one dropped earlier and fished it out from under a tangle of roots. Celine's voice came through bright with business. North exit is blocked. Bonuses stand for completion before midnight. Keep chatter down. Audio's hot. Even soaked, she sounded like a concierge. I pressed the talk key and let my voice sharpen to a point. Help kids. Armed men hunting. I said 5 words and nothing else clear enough for distance to carry. Then I threw the radio hard toward the ravine mouth we weren't using and listened to branches complain as it went. Rook's steps changed direction almost at once, quiet becoming purposeful, while Kellen blundered after the noise like a dog after a thrown pan. We used their pivot to cut northwest through low growth that grabbed at the stupid white fabric. When the brush opened, the fence appeared as a shadow stitched with diamonds, the camera on the gatepost blinking its little red lie. Everything is normal. This was the eye I hadn't managed to blind that morning. Chain link gives in one of 2 ways. Fast to bolt cutters, slow to stubbornness. I had stubbornness. I slid the taped blades from my pocket and started sawing near the bottom rail where we could belly through. Each strand sang a thin metallic complaint, then snapped with a noise that felt too loud in my bones. Blood slicked my fingers where the tape had turned to sandpaper. Ivy crouched with her knife in a fist and watched the trees the way a cat watches a door. 3 strands down. 5. 7. The whole grew from nothing into promise. That was when light found us, white hard artificial. The SUV rolled along the interior road with its roof spotlight making daytime wherever it pointed. I clapped flat, dragging Ivy with me into the wet leaves as the beam skimmed the fence, hesitated at our cut panel, then moved on like a suspicious eye. I crawled backward until my fingers discovered the tin I'd buried under a stone at noon. Dry needles. I struck a match from the shed, a small sun under a careful hand. The needles took, then sulked when I fed them wet twigs, doing exactly what I wanted: smoke without flame. A gray curtain that drifted toward the fence and made a cough out of the world. Somewhere above the wash of weather, Celine's voice cut real this time, not through a radio as she backed away from the smoke she didn't expect. Now, I whispered, and we slithered toward thicker cover. My ankle chose that moment to mutiny. It rolled hard, popping like corn heat, and lightning knifing up the outside of my calf. I bit down on the inside of my cheek until iron filled my mouth and kept moving because movement was the only thing that hadn't betrayed me yet. We skidded down a mud-slick slope into a shallow ravine that stank of cedar, drowned in rotting leaves. Above, the spotlight smeared the smoke into wallpaper and voices tried to staple it into order. Rooks came from the left edge, collected clinical. Hold lines. Stop rushing. You're feeding their misdirection. 10 grand extra. If you let me make it clean, he called then, not to us, but to the dark that held us the way a surgeon might greet a gurney. No rage in it, no thrill, just an offer to be efficient. I hated him more for that. The ravine's center was a rib cage of dead limbs. I threaded my rope around the arrow shaft a foot from the tip and bound it tight. The spear wasn't pretty, but it gave the future a handle. Ivy's lips had gone the gray-blue of sky before dawn. I tucked her hands in my armpits to warm them and breathed slow so she could borrow the rhythm. We hold 2 hours, I said. We win. We didn't get a full minute. A man with a knife punched through alder at the ravine lip, feet too fast for the terrain, Mac reckless with pain and rage from earlier. He came down the mud like a too-heavy suitcase. I didn't give him a speech, just dirt, a palm of wet soil to the eyes old as war, quick as thought. He reeled, trying to blink the forest back into place. I borrowed his momentum, pivoted, and shoved him into the stake field I'd planted when the slope was dry. The scream started in his boot and climbed into his mouth. Don't look, I told Ivy, because looking writes the wrong book in your head. We crabbed deeper under the rib of wood where rain became drips and then only sound. The spear waited in my hand like it had been waiting all my life. Rook eased along the ravine's upper edge, reading the way water made new paths, the way smoke pulled one direction and then the other. He crouched to peer through a gap, and I drove the spear up. The broadhead found thigh sank a breath-hit muscle and met the kind of resistance that makes your whole arm ring. Rook jerked back with a noise finally not professional, a break in the porcelain, then swore once softly, like a man handing himself a fact he didn't like. Sirens lifted out of the weather, then not rumor, but declaration, more than one closer than hope deserved. Red and blue flashed behind the trees far to the east, little shivers of color reflecting off wet leaves. I felt the world tip just a fraction, like a boat meeting a new current. Celine answered the sirens by setting the world on fire. I smelled accelerant first, then watched a low line of yellow run uphill against the rain, too wet to spread properly, bright enough to make day in the ravine. Flames licked the edges of the smoke into sharpness. Stories straight, her voice snapped over a different radio, and the calm was gone, replaced by a hard glitter. Cameras down on east. Move the SUV. Do not get caught with anything in your hands. The fire drove us. The ravine choked us. Rook limped left bow still in his hand, counting his arrows by feel. I hauled Ivy up the far bank, the spear angled forward to buy us a yard if we needed a yard. My ankle felt like it had decided to be someone else's problem. I gave it a new job hinge, not engine, and kept going. At the top, the world reassembled into the simple math of rain and wood. The fence lay 50 yards ahead, the camera a red constellation at the gate. To the right, the SUV cut its light across trunks and wire, a false moon dragging shadows around like a net. To the left, the first smear of color that might, if you let yourself believe it, be dawn under the storm. Run! I told Ivy, and we did in that bent fast way you run when the air is made of knives. An arrow hit a branch to our right and made the branch tell the forest about it. I counted in my head. Rook's quiver had looked like 6 earlier. He'd shot at least 2, maybe 3 if the lure cloth had eaten one. That left 3 or 4. 4 arrows was a smaller number than 5 men, and the math made me baldly, briefly happy. We reached the panel I'd half cut and went to our bellies again. I sawed at the last stubborn strands, wrist bones grinding. Each snap took a year off my life and gave it back as a sharp breath. Ivy pushed with her shoulders, widening the gape. Behind us, men shouted without agreeing on what to shout. The fire threw new light and the rain threw it away. Headlights curved toward the gate from outside the property. Different angle, different attitude. Doors thumped. Voices came clipped, trained, certain. My skin remembered the sound from school assemblies and parades, deputies, not clients. Celine's tone climbed a register as she tried to make the first lie stand on its own legs. Trespassers, she said to someone I couldn't see. Vandalism. They broke into my cameras. We shoved through the hole. Wire bit the back of my thighs and wrote welts there. On the far side, we came up into a squat, then a stand, and the world felt wrong with openness. The gate to our right yawned half shut around a knot of uniforms who had stopped moving in that particular way. Police stop moving when something reframes itself in front of them. I pulled the torn white cloth from my pocket and held it high. It wasn't a flag, so much as a definition. Ivy squeezed my other hand until bone woke bone. "We're kids!" I shouted through the rain and the mesh and the smoke that had followed us. My voice cracked and then found itself again. "They're hunting us with weapons. There are 5. A deputy's head snapped toward us, body angling to make a wall with his shoulders and a path with his hands. His radio hand went up, and the cadence of the scene changed, as if someone had flipped it from chaos to plan. Another deputy moved for the chain on the gate. Celine stepped to block him the way she blocked invoices and complaints. He didn't stop. He brushed past and reached for the lock. Hands where I can see them, a voice called, "Not to us," to the trees behind us. The tone was an anchor in the flood. For a second, the whole forest paused on one breath. Hunters listening to the first order they didn't own. Rain applauding, nobody, fire hissing at small argument with wet. Ivy's hand stayed like a bird in mine. The red and blue lights brightened until night became something with edges. And then the chain clinked and the gate began to move. The chain clinks. The gate yawns. A deputy plants himself between us and the woods, the way a door braces against wind. Hands visible, he calls to the trees, not to me. Another deputy works the lock. A third keeps his gaze on our faces, voice steady and exact. "You hurt weapons on you. Knife her hand," I say, nodding at Ivy's fist. "For grabbing, not for—" We didn't, words tangle. He nods, palms up, lets me set the knife on the gravel. Ivy's fingers won't unclench until he says, "You're safe," like a password that opens the rest of her hand. Blue and red wash the fence. In that strobe, the forest shows its truths. Mac howling from my stake field, Kellen limping on a bad twist, Drew coughing and trying to look unarmed, Rook moving with the economy of a man who measures options by inches and odds. The command cadence snaps into place. 2 to the ravine, 1 to the south line, long guns down, you gloves tourniquet ready. Celine steps forward with her customer service voice polished bright. "They broke my cameras. They're trespassing." A deputy doesn't even look at her when he says, "Ma'am, step aside." She reaches to touch his sleeve. The cuffs answer instead, simple as punctuation. They bring us through the gate without hurry and with all the urgency in the world. A deputy squats eye level with Ivy. "I'm Ruiz. What's your name?" Ivy looks at me first. "Ivy," she whispers a syllable. "You could lose in rain." "Good," Ruiz says. "Paramedics are here. We stay together until you say otherwise." Gurney's ghost up out of the dark. Hands check vitals, wrap gauze. The world narrows to sensible nouns. Splint, blanket, saline, lens cap, body cam. Over a medic's shoulder, I watch officers fan into Pine Hollow, light sweeping where the men once had confidence. The bear trap complains like a kettle when they free the man inside. Rook tries to run on a bad thigh and is done by yard 7. I hand a detective a pocketful of SD cards, each in its little sleeve of damp. "Trail cams," I say. "Angles overlap here, here, and here." I draw a map on the back of an incident form because paper makes a story hold still. The detective reads while rain inks the edges of his notes. Name's Calder, he says, not writing that part down. You did right. At the hospital, the fluorescent light is honest, and the air smells like everything clean. They photograph arrow burns and the ladder of cuts on my feet. They wrap my ankle and cover Ivy with heated blankets until her shaking is just shivering and her lips remember pink. A woman in a charcoal blazer arrives with an ID that says Maria Sloan Child and Family Services. Her voice is tea-hot. I'm here for both of you, she says. Not either. She explains things in short square words. Emergency placement forensic interview advocate. She asks if we want to stay in the same room while questions happen. Yes, I say. Ivy nods against the blanket, as if the fabric could answer for her. Detective Calder comes back with a tech who cradles the SD cards like eggs. We've got the generator, the shed, the cameras, he says. No one's erasing anything. He doesn't ask why I didn't tell sooner. He doesn't ask why a mother would. He asks where the extra lens was mounted over the east swale, and I show him with my hand like I'm placing a star. Dawn bleeds in behind storm and glass. News vans idle beyond the ambulance bay until an officer moves them to the far curb. Sloan tells us our names won't be printed, our faces won't be shown. You are children, she says, in case we forgot in the trees. Days slide into hearings. Celine is charged trafficking conspiracy aggravated assault tampering. Bail is a number that might as well be a wall. The men make deals in the shadow of each other's words. Rook pleads to what the evidence refuses to let go. The others try to bargain with smaller truths and find out truth isn't a thing you can chop. Weeks tip into months. I move into a house with a porch and a woman who bakes on Thursdays and a man who builds things slower than the world demands. They hand me a pair of running shoes like they've been waiting on the shelf for my feet. I run in the morning on sidewalks that don't remember blood. At noon, I trace algebra the way I once traced creeks. In the afternoon, a therapist named Owen teaches my body different math, how a breath can be more useful than a flinch, how numbers can be a ladder out of panic and not a tunnel through it. Nightmares still arrive. They leave sooner. Ivy's placed 2 counties over with a family that speaks to her in patient sentences and shows her where the light switches are in the dark. Twice a week, we sit in front of separate screens and talk about small things on purpose, what she drew in art class, how many minutes I shaved off my mile, how rain sounds when it hits real roofs. Sloan listens the first few times, then only checks in at the end. The calls become the part of the week points toward. The case grinds the way cases grind sworn statements, chain of custody hearings that start late and end with new dates stapled to old dates. Calder calls when there's something we ought to know. A plea entered, a motion denied, an account frozen and earmarked for victim compensation. I make one appearance and tell only what happened and where. That is enough. Our survival does not owe anyone a performance. On a morning that smells like cut grass, the sentences are read. They are not short. Words like consecutive and registry and no contact are said into a room that holds them. I listen from a hallway chair under a framed print of a lighthouse I don't recognize. It looks like something that stands its ground. Afterward, I walk home by a longer route on purpose. A kid scooters past with a helmet too big for his head. A dog argues with a sparrow. Someone burns toast. Ordinary life is loud in a way I decide I like. At my desk that night, I take the broadhead from the zip bag where the police returned personal items not needed for court. I put it in the back of a drawer under a coil of spare laces. Not as a shrine. As a hinge, a small, sharp memory doors can swing on without cutting your hand. I set my alarm for early. The shoes wait by the door. On the notepad beside them are 3 signals written in my hand. 1 squeeze, stop. 2 danger, 3 run, kept. Not because we need them, but because they belong to us when the night did not. We are not prey. We are learning the names of streets and seasons. And in the mornings when the light comes clean and unarmed, we go out and meet it. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.